People often tell me, Cecily, you've always been such a graceful woman, and I smile when they say that. Not because they're right, but because they only saw the version of me that I allowed the world to see. They thought I was patient. They thought I was kind. They thought I was the sort of woman who never raised her voice and never held a grudge. What they never realized was that, for most of my life, I wasn't being graceful. I was being afraid. Afraid of disappointing people. Afraid of making someone uncomfortable. Afraid that, if I spoke too honestly, I would be seen as difficult, selfish, or ungrateful. So I smiled. I apologized when I had done nothing wrong. I accepted words that quietly wounded me, because I believed keeping the peace was more important than protecting my own heart. It took me more than 90 years to understand how expensive that belief truly was. Not expensive in money, expensive in dignity, in self-respect, in all the nights I lay awake replaying conversations I wished had ended differently. Looking back now, I realize that the deepest scars in my life were not caused by people shouting at me. They were caused by quiet moments, a careless sentence, a dismissive glance, a joke everyone else laughed at, the kind of moments that leave no visible bruise, yet somehow stay with you for decades. Perhaps you've lived through moments like that too. Maybe someone interrupted you as if your opinion didn't matter. Maybe your children made decisions without asking what you thought. Maybe your husband, your wife, a friend, or even a stranger spoke to you in a way that left you feeling smaller than you were just a few seconds before. And perhaps, just like I did, you smiled, said, "It's all right," and carried that hurt home without saying another word. I know that feeling. I carried it for most of my life. But here's what surprises me now. The people who hurt us are not always cruel. Sometimes they're simply distracted. Sometimes they're overwhelmed. Sometimes they never even realize they've wounded us. That doesn't erase the pain, but it changes the way we choose to live with it. Today, at 91 years old, I want to share 5 lessons that took me an entire lifetime to learn. Not lessons from books, not advice from experts, but lessons written into ordinary days, family dinners, quiet kitchens, hospital rooms, and long bus rides home with tears I refuse to let anyone see. If someone has ever made you feel invisible, if you've ever walked away from a conversation thinking, "I should have said something," or if you've spent years believing that being nice meant staying silent, then I hope you'll stay with me. Because by the end of this conversation, I don't just want you to know how to respond when someone disrespects you. I want you to remember something even more important. Your kindness should never require you to abandon your dignity. And the first lesson came to me on an ordinary afternoon in 1987, standing quietly in my daughter's kitchen, holding a warm casserole that suddenly felt much heavier than it really was. Lesson 1. Learn to recognize disrespect. The first lesson may sound simple, but it is the hardest one to learn. You cannot respond to disrespect until you recognize it for what it truly is. For years, I believed disrespect had to be loud. I thought it came in the form of shouting, insults, or angry arguments. I was wrong. The deepest wounds often arrive wearing a polite smile. I remember an afternoon in 1987 when I visited my daughter with a warm casserole I had spent hours preparing. My granddaughter was only a few months old, and I wanted nothing more than to make life a little easier for the young family. When my son-in-law opened the door, he looked surprised. As I stepped inside, he smiled politely and said, "You really don't have to keep bringing food. We've got everything under control." There was nothing cruel about his tone, nothing that anyone else would have noticed, but something inside me quietly collapsed. What I heard wasn't his sentence. What I heard was, "You aren't needed anymore." I smiled anyway. I placed the casserole on the kitchen counter, held my granddaughter for a little while, and went home without saying a word. For years, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it. Do you see what I was doing? I was defending the person who had hurt me before I had even allowed myself to admit I was hurting. Many of us spend our lives translating painful words into kinder ones because we are afraid of appearing unreasonable. But healing begins the moment we stop rewriting someone else's actions. Sometimes disrespect is not hidden. Sometimes we simply refuse to see it, because acknowledging it would force us to face a painful truth. The first step is not fighting back. The first step is being honest with yourself. Only when you recognize the wound can you begin to protect your dignity. Lesson 2. Choose your response, not your reaction. Many years later, a woman named Bess taught me something that changed the way I looked at difficult people forever. Bess lived a few houses down from ours. She was small in stature, but carried herself with remarkable confidence. People often called her stubborn, but I believe she simply refused to let other people define her worth. After her husband announced he was leaving for another woman, the entire neighborhood expected tears, pleading, or anger. Instead, Bess quietly looked at him and said only one word, "All right." Then she walked into the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea. I could hardly believe it. Later, I asked her how she managed to stay so calm. She smiled and said something I have never forgotten. When people hurt you, they often expect a performance. Don't give them one. That sentence stayed with me for decades. When someone disrespects you, they already imagine how you will react. Perhaps they expect you to cry. Perhaps they expect you to argue. Perhaps they expect you to defend yourself. Every emotional reaction gives them confidence that they have control over your peace. But silence, when chosen intentionally, has incredible strength. Choosing your response does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means refusing to let another person's behavior decide who you become in that moment. Calm is not weakness, it is discipline. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is pause, breathe, and allow silence to speak where anger cannot. People may forget your words, they rarely forget your composure. That was the day I understood that dignity is often protected not by speaking first, but by refusing to surrender your peace. Lesson 3. Sometimes the strongest choice is to walk away. For most of my life, I believed staying proved strength. If a conversation became uncomfortable, I stayed. If someone embarrassed me, I stayed. If I felt invisible, I stayed. I thought enduring everything made me a better wife, mother, and friend. Then my son Paul taught me something I should have learned decades earlier. He worked for a supervisor who criticized him constantly. Nothing he did was ever good enough. Every mistake was announced in front of his coworkers. Every success was ignored. One evening he came home and quietly told us he had resigned. My husband was furious. "You don't quit," he said. "You work harder and prove yourself." Paul listened patiently before answering with a calm voice, "I don't need to prove my value to someone who has already decided not to respect me." The room fell silent. Those words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. I realized there had been countless moments in my own life when I could have walked away. I could have left uncomfortable dinners. I could have ended conversations that slowly chipped away at my confidence. I could have protected my peace instead of sacrificing it just to avoid disappointing other people. Leaving does not always mean ending a relationship. Sometimes it simply means removing yourself from a conversation that no longer deserves your presence. There is a difference between facing discomfort and accepting disrespect. Growth often requires discomfort, but dignity should never require humiliation. The older I became, the more I realized that every place you remain teaches people how they are allowed to treat you. Sometimes walking away is not giving up. Sometimes it is the clearest way to tell yourself, "I know my worth, and I refuse to bargain with it." Lesson 4. Find the courage to speak. The fourth lesson came to me much later than I wish it had. I was 73 years old before I truly learned the power of one small word: no. For most of my life, every refusal I ever gave came wrapped in an apology. No, but maybe later. No, if it isn't too much trouble. No, but I understand. I was so afraid of disappointing people that even my boundaries needed permission. Then one evening, during a family dinner, something changed. I had spent 2 full days preparing the meal. My hands were stiff from arthritis, but cooking for my family had always been my way of saying, I love you. As everyone finished eating, my sister-in-law smiled kindly and said, Next year, perhaps you should let the younger generation cook. You've done enough. Everyone nodded. No one noticed the sadness behind my smile. To them, it sounded thoughtful. To me, it sounded like someone had quietly decided my usefulness had expired. For a long moment, I simply looked around the table. Then I heard myself say something I had never said before. No, not angrily, not loudly, just clearly. I'll stop cooking when I decide I'm ready, not when someone else decides for me. The room became silent. My hands trembled beneath the tablecloth. But for the first time in decades, my heart felt strangely peaceful. I finally understood that speaking up isn't about winning an argument. It's about refusing to disappear. You don't need clever words. You don't need a dramatic speech. Sometimes dignity begins with one honest sentence, one calm boundary, one quiet no. And once you say it for the first time, you'll realize something beautiful. The people who truly love you may be surprised, but they will also learn how to love the real you. If anything you've heard today feels familiar, if you've spent years carrying feelings you never had the chance to express, I left something special in the pinned comment below this video. It's simply a collection of thoughts that help me find my own voice. Read it whenever you have a quiet moment. There's no hurry. Lesson 5. Forgive yourself before you forgive anyone else. The final lesson isn't about the people who hurt you. It's about the person you see in the mirror afterward. For years, I replayed painful moments over and over again. I imagined better answers, stronger words, braver versions of myself. I would lie awake wondering why I hadn't spoken, why I smiled, why I stayed, why I let someone else's opinion become my own. Little by little, I realized I wasn't suffering because of what they had done anymore. I was suffering because I had never forgiven myself. The younger woman I used to be wasn't weak. She was doing what she had been taught. She believed kindness meant silence. She believed love meant sacrifice. She believed keeping everyone comfortable mattered more than protecting her own heart. How could I blame her for following the lessons the world had handed her? One afternoon, while folding my late husband's shirts long after he was gone, I stopped for a moment and looked at my trembling hands. Those hands had raised children, cooked thousands of meals, held newborn grandchildren, comforted friends, cared for the man I loved until his final breath. Those hands had never failed me. Why was I still punishing the woman they belonged to? That was the day I chose compassion instead of criticism. You will not always say the perfect thing. Sometimes fear will win. Sometimes you will freeze. Sometimes the moment will pass before you find your voice. That's part of being human. Don't spend the next 20 years punishing yourself for one imperfect moment. Learn from it. Grow because of it. But don't carry it forever, because the greatest act of respect you can ever receive begins with the respect you choose to give yourself. As I sit here at 91 years old, I've come to understand something I wish someone had told me when I was much younger. Life is not measured by how many arguments you win. It is measured by how much of yourself you manage to keep. For many years, I believed that being loved meant always making other people comfortable. I confused silence with kindness. I confused endurance with strength. And I confused self-sacrifice with love. But time has a gentle way of correcting the stories we tell ourselves. Looking back now, I don't remember every disagreement. I don't remember every harsh word that was spoken to me. What I remember are the moments when I abandoned my own voice because I was afraid of losing someone else's approval. Those are the moments I wish I could gently place my hand on my younger shoulder and whisper, You matter too. The beautiful thing about growing older is that wisdom rarely arrives all at once. It comes quietly. One conversation, one mistake, one heartbreak, one act of courage at a time. If there is one message I hope stays with you after this video, it is this. You do not have to become louder to protect your dignity. You do not have to become colder to protect your heart. You simply have to remember that your kindness should never come at the cost of your self-respect. Some people will understand your boundaries, others won't. That is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to live in a way that allows you to look in the mirror with peace. Because at the end of our lives, we don't carry every opinion people had about us. We carry the relationship we built with ourselves. And that relationship deserves kindness too. So the next time someone dismisses your feelings, the next time someone speaks to you as though your voice doesn't matter, pause, take a breath, remember these 5 lessons, recognize the disrespect, choose your response, walk away when necessary, speak your truth with calm confidence, and above all, forgive yourself for the moments when you couldn't. None of us get it right every time. I certainly didn't. Even at 91, I'm still learning. Perhaps that's what wisdom really is, not becoming perfect, but becoming a little more honest, a little more peaceful, and a little more compassionate with every passing year. If this conversation reminded you of someone you love, or perhaps reminded you of yourself, I hope you'll share it with someone who may need these words today. And before you leave, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these 5 lessons spoke to your heart the most? Please tell me in the comments below. Your story may become the encouragement someone else has been waiting to hear. Thank you for spending these moments with me. Until we meet again, be gentle with others, but never forget to be gentle with yourself.